Hello, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach. In the past, I've talked about this notion that artists try to go after audiences that aren't meant for them, right? And they spend so much time doing it rather than focusing on the audience that is for them, right? And I want to build upon that notion and look at it from a different perspective through the lens of the law of diffusion, as come up by Emmett Rogers. And before I fully get into it, I would like to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So let's talk about this. Firstly, we have to define what the law of diffusion is. So I'm going to read here. Emmett Rogers argues that diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated over time among the participants in a social system. Okay, not much there. But what he says, there's 5 main elements that influence the spread of a new idea. The innovation itself, the adopters, communication channels, time, and a social system. Okay? And I've linked to a graph in the description box so you can kind of see this as well if you're just listening to this, but you can see how this works. And the idea is that, let's take something like a smartphone, right? When smartphones are first introduced, you're not going to get the whole population on board. But what you need to do is get the early adopters on board, right? The people that are, very tech friendly and so forth, get them intrigued and they'll get into it. Then through osmosis, they'll talk to their friends and the people kind of, it's a bell curve, right? Ultimately. So the early adopters represent a small portion at the very beginning of this timeline. And through dialogue and so forth, they'll convince their friends and other people, right? All of a sudden, people start taking notice. And then that becomes like, the majority of the population. And then by the tail end, the small percentage, you'll get the people that are the opposite of early adopters and eventually get them, right? Because you've essentially reached critical mass of, that product, right? You can look at sort of NFTs are going this way as well. Right now, I think we're just kind of getting into things where there was the early adopters and they were getting on board with this. And, now, even if you don't have an NFT or know how it completely works, at this point, you've kind of probably heard the term NFT, right? And so we're at that kind of point where, now more and more people, the more everyday people that have, not really much know-how of like true investing or, technology, certainly not cryptocurrency. Now they're like, we're getting to that phase of it, right? And eventually it'll take things and, NFTs and cryptocurrency and so forth will kind of go that way, right? It just takes time. How much time? I can't predict that for NFTs in particular, but that's the idea, right? And when you look at it in that sense, right, it really reflects how to build an audience, right? We have to consider it like a bell curve where instead of going after the people that like are going to be hard to convince, go after the quote unquote early adopters, the ones who are going to be just fanatics about your art, right? That's the real goal that we're after. And that's what you should really aspire to. And in a lot of ways, like all of us, one thing to also really consider is all of us are early adopters in something, right? This isn't just about technology. You can look at this in any sort of sense. When it comes to fashion, I'm not going to be an early adopter, but I'm certainly not going to like lag behind, right? So it's also an interesting exercise to look at from that perspective itself, but I digress. The point being, really think about who, in terms of what you're creating, who are those early adopters and how can you reach them, and really make their experience with your art, whatever it may be, as genuine and uplifting as possible. And when you do this, then it'll start to, have that word of mouth. In podcasting, in the early beginnings, right, you can see this in that sense too. There were the early adopters, and then it reached critical mass, and now not only are there like thousands of podcasts out there by, every celebrity you can imagine, but now also most people, everyday people, listen to at least one podcast a day, right? And so in that sense, that it was that kind of word of mouth, that organic kind of nature to it. And so what you want to do is you want to replicate that. You want to go after that audience that's going to resonate most with the thing that you're creating. And I know it can seem tough and things like that, but really take a step back and really look at it, right? Because part of the unfortunate truth, it might not be your friends and family. That's always a great start, and you want to kind of use that to your advantage. But who are the evangelicals of what you're creating? And it might differ, that's the other thing. It might differ from project to project, especially like if you're going to switch it up. Like for example, my first novel is a coming of age story. The second one I'm writing is more of a science fiction cyberpunk, right? So two different audiences potentially there, right? I mean, quite frankly, probably. And so you have to approach it in different ways depending on the project. And so, that's something to really consider and how to really go about that. One of the interesting hacks from Tim Ferriss, whenever he completes a book, he reaches out to authors and says, he has like a series of questions if they're willing to participate. He asks where did you spend money on that essentially didn't yield as many results? And then conversely, the second question of what was an aspect that was surprising to you in terms of, where you wish you'd spent more money that gave you the most results, right? Almost like a Pareto principle thing in that sense, right? And he did it within the last year because, of course, it changes. And that's fun fact. How we got into podcasting was because in terms of book promotion, people were saying going on podcasts was selling great, and ironically, the typical go on late night shows or things like that, go on TV, it wasn't selling as many books. And that's what got into podcasting. Again, I sort of digress, but it illustrates an interesting point of the idea, even with the same product, essentially, other factors come into it of how you reach that audience, right? But regardless, the idea is, your first step is to identify the early adopters of what you have, right? Find that audience, really hone in. Where are those people? Who are those people? And go after them. And then not necessarily let nature take its course, but it will be that much easier for you because you'll be swimming with the current as opposed to against it, right? And that's the whole idea. So I hope this is helpful in that way to kind of reframe how to go after your audience, because in many ways, we feel it's so daunting, right? Especially this idea that, that with social media, there's limitless potential of who to reach and so forth. And that's all well, and, yes, it would be great if you had millions upon millions of followers. But, through evidence of law of diffusion, the way to reach that critical mass is to start with a very specific set of audience and go from there, right? And that's how I've been kind of looking at it now. Now that this law of diffusion came into my life and I really thought about it of wow, okay, there's something there and it's applicable to artists. So, that's what I have for you. As always, if you have any questions or thoughts of your own, please share down in the comments section or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek. Likewise, if you would like more direct interaction about this topic, that's what my Patreon page is designed for. There, through the various tiers, there's ways I can help support you and interact with you on a more one-on-one level. So consider joining, right? Patreon.com/Phil Svitek. And as I've alluded to, I have plenty of stuff out there of my own that I've created, whether movies, books, all that is in the description box as well. So So if you'd like to, if you like what I do and are curious of what I've done, check those out and support me that way. So thank you. I appreciate you, and hope to see you next time.